time of the King of France and Emperor Charlemagne, she was the Lady of Trigon, rich and great castle in Picardy, derived from the ancient Dukes of Montichaux in Swabia, and by the Duke Salardo, whose son Coraldo, militating under the King Pippin, bought many castles, and the lordship of Trigon in Picardy.
Thus writes in 1647, the historian Philadelpho Mugnos wrote in his genealogical theatre of the titulate noble families. The Trigona are an ancient Sicilian aristocratic family whose origins are lost in the mists of time when the Merovingians still reigned over the Franks, although they were the sons of Carlo Martello, Charlemagne and Pippin the Short, who ruled them. In De Origine et Situ Germanorum, Tacitus recounts that the Swabians, a Germanic people originally from the Baltic Sea,
do not constitute a single tribe like the Carti or Tencteri. They occupy a large part of Germany, divided into clans with proper names. However, altogether, they are called Swabians. The hallmark of these people is to twist the hair sideways and tie it up with a knot. The Swabians differ in this way from other Germans and, within them, distinguish free men from slaves. Among other peoples this is a rare use and followed only by young people, due to affinity with the Swabians, or, as often happens, by imitation. The nobles add some ornaments to appear even more imposing and terrible in the eyes of their enemies when they go to war.
Swabia became a duchy under the reign of the Merovingian Franks, in 496 after Christ, following the Battle of Tulbiacum. Their conversion to Christianity dates back to the 6th century, mainly by the abbot San Columbano. Trigona is a Sicilian ancient aristocratic family of Swabian origin, as the historian Philadelpho Mugnos wrote in 1647 in his genealogical theatre of the titulate noble families. Franks were also a group of Germanic populations settled along the border of the Roman Empire who, under the leadership of the rulers of the Merovingian and then Carolingian dynasty, soon became protagonists of the European scene so as to give life, for better or for worse, to one of the decisive moments in continental history. To govern them was Childeric, 46th and last of the Merovingian dynasty, who reigned over all the Franks from 743 to 751 after Christ, when he was deposed by a conspiracy hatched by Pepin the Short, father of Charlemagne, and by Pope Zacharias. Pippin the Short was butler of the Palace of Neustria, 741 to 751, and of Austrasia, 751 to 768. He was crowned king of the Franks by the Pope who, threatened by the advance of the Lombards, had obtained his protection by returning the help received from Pippin the Brief with a formally illegitimate coronation justified by the principle that the title of king should belong to those who exercise the power and not to those of royal blood. According to Mugnos, but also according to other historians such as Francesco Gaetani of Villabianca, this is the context in which the founder of the Trigona family lived.
The Duke Salado, Duke of Monticello in Swabia, whose son Coraldo, militating under King Pepin, bought many castles, and the lordship of Trigon in Picardia.
In a few lines, what appears to be a normal succession of parent and child is summarized. But contextualizing and historicizing it, the probable dramatic reality of a family affair upset by historical events emerges. Leafing through the chronicles of the time, in particular the Annales Metenses Priories, it turns out that,
in 743 BC, the Swabians were not allies of the Franks but their fierce opponents along with other Germanic peoples.
The Annales Metenses Priories are an anonymous work, dating back to the beginning of the 9th century, that report the events of the Frankish reign in the period from the year 678 to 830 after Christ. In its pages we read that,
in 743 the Duke of Bavaria, Odilon, rebelled against the authority of the Franks, thus forcing Charlemagne and Pippin to gather the army to attack Bavaria. They encamped on the banks of the Lech River, while on the opposite bank not only Bavaria but also Saxons, Swabians and Alemanni gathered. Carlomanno, after having divided the army into two groups, crossed the Lech at night, in swampy and uninhabited areas. Falling unexpectedly on his opponents, he defeated them, while Odilo and Theodoric, Duke of the Saxons, fled over the river
in 743 after Christ. Therefore, the Swabians were adversaries of the Franks and are defeated by them. Years later, however, the Annales Metenses Priories always report that,
in 748, Pippin chased his stepbrother Grifone. After crossing Thuringia, he arrived in Saxony and occupied the border town of Skarningi where the Swabians had arrived to help him.
Within a few years the alliances changed and the Swabians now fight alongside the Franks. A circumstance which, as Mugnos writes, supports the fact that
Coraldo, militating under King Pepin, bought many castles, and the lordship of Trigon in Picardia.
Here too, one could think of finding oneself in front of the normality of a simple change of alliances, the fruit of, as always, a pure calculation of convenience. But is not so. Once again the chronicles turn out to be illuminating, describing a context that goes beyond the tragedy. According to what is reported in the Annales Metenses Priories, the Annales Petaviani and a report by Sildebrand, in fact, it turns out that in 746 after Christ, Charlemagne had summoned the entire Alemannic and Swabian ruling class to an assembly in Cannstatt, and then had them executed for high treason. The thousands of nobles present, perhaps, who knows, even Duke Salado himself, were thus exterminated by imposing succession. Carlomanno and Pepin thus succeeded in quelling the ongoing Germanic revolts, enslaving those peoples to their dominion. A fact that reveals the meaning of a rotation from father to son, not the result of a normal succession, but precisely of a brutal abuse of power. It is impossible to say how, in fact, things went. But it is conceivable that, in 743, Duke Salado, founder of the Trigona, fought together with the other Swabians against the Franks. And that, for this reason, in 746, in Cannstatt or immediately after, succession was imposed on him in favor of his son Coraldo who,
militating under King Pepin, bought many castles, and the lordship of Trigon in Picardia.
At this point, there are many hypotheses to be taken into consideration. Salado could have died fighting near the Lech River, or he could have been killed right there in Cannstatt. He may also have somehow managed to escape both tragic events. In any case, succession will have been imposed on him in favor of his son Coraldo, who was able to keep, or obtain the title, because he was too young to be compromised with the rebellions. Sworn loyalty to the Franks, Coraldo,
militating under King Pepin, bought many castles, and the lordship of Trigon in Picardia.
It is therefore evident how history, the great history, enters people's lives, imposing choices that condition their existence, and that of their genus. As in this case, in fact, the possible adoption of different solutions could also have led to the possible early extinction of the lineage.
If Salado had done this, if Coraldo had decided to,
there would never have been a story. History tells us that, in the 8th century, a man and his son made serious decisions due to their relevance, and that a lineage, the Trigona, originated from those decisions. In time of the King of France and Emperor Charlemagne,
she was the Lady of Trigon, rich and great castle in Picardy, derived from the ancient dukes of Monticello in Swabia, and by the Duke Salado,
militating
whose
under
son
King
Coraldo,
Pepin, bought many castles,
and the lordship of Trigon in Picardia.
In a few lines, unimaginable realities are contained, entire existences that unfortunately are being lost in an inexorable oblivion.